Hello. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? You can hear me? Hang on. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, very good. Very, very good. I thought Bob just joined on another email. Let me just see. I just got an email request from one of the guys for the link. Just 1 second. Yeah, okay. Right, good. Okay, I'm here. Yeah, so I'm in Norway now, Bergen, as we just communicated back and forth. It's just to see my mother, really. So we're at our kind of summer house. And it's definitely not summer outside. Either Fabian started meditating or he's frozen. And you're muted. Fabian is not meditating, he was frozen. Fabian, you were frozen just as you closed your eyes for a blink.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. I have some connection issue. Everything is wired. It shouldn't, but internet weather.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. I'm sitting here in the countryside by a fjord in Norway, and the internet is super ridiculously fast. And then when I sit in London, in Wimbledon, sometimes just nothing. So yeah, it's a bit random.
First world problems, eh?
Yeah.
Indeed. Hey, Bob.
Hello.
So Bob, having seen some of the messages going back and forth about your mural in VR, are you tempted to get yourself a headset to look at it for real? For virtually real?
I'm not quite ready yet, but I'm interested. And one of the things that that I'd like to do, if I could have maybe 10 or 15 minutes today to not for any kind of presentation, but to ask specific questions of some of the people in the group. I really would like to, because I think we, by organizing a little bit, just partially organizing a little bit of our discourse, I could identify what some of the issues are, which maybe have all been discussed, but haven't been summarized in any kind of easy way. And I even though it's very easy, even though it's great to have the record that you make at the end of our discussion, it isn't organized. It isn't organized into the near term and long term, for example. And I'd like to know what some of those are before I decide to commit my time to this, because my time is at least to me so valuable that I cannot spend it. And I'm saying this to each of my projects. I've got it on my agenda this afternoon for the University of Melbourne national security project and so forth. But yes, and there's a really good, at least to me, really important question that I ask an ex-wife of mine who spends a lot of time in Second Life, and says that they have a bunch of libraries. It isn't her thing, but they have a lot of libraries in Second Life that are organized in some way. And she's willing to put me in touch with a librarian there. A serious, let's say, First Life librarian who also works in Second Life and would be able to tell us at least about how they organize in 3 dimensions a whole bunch of different libraries. There are different universities who are teaching courses in this place. And there are different people, she says, who have brought their whole libraries in. And we're just talking, at least the last conversation we had with the last group of people that we had at that one, we were only sort of waving our hands and saying, oh, wouldn't it be nice? And, oh, you could do it in virtual reality. And hey, people have done it in 3 dimensions already. We ought to know about it. We ought to be able to maybe even bring that librarian in at some point if the group is totally interested in it.
I think that would make.
That's what I've been up to over the weekend.
I think that would make for a very good monthly session for sure. I mean, of course. Hang on, I'll just reply when Brandel is here. Hi, Brandel. Bob was just saying a friend is suggesting someone he knows who has worked a lot with libraries in Second Life could maybe come and talk to us. And that would, of course, be very, very interesting. But obviously, I think it is very, very different 3D on a 2D screen than VR. But yes, we should absolutely use that experience. And Mark, you have your hand up politely, like me.
Yes, just a quick one. It's actually rather pertinent in a way to what Bob was just saying. But one of the things about putting some more sort of concrete structure and things, I'm a bit late to the past, but I'm working with Fred just to actually sort of corral the journal. And I mean, Fred's done sterling work in terms of lots of recording and the transcriptions and various people to put things together. One of the things I'm going to try and help with is just putting that into a slightly more findable form, so that our journal sort of becomes more of a real thing. In other words, we got lots of stuff. I think at the moment it's not particularly hard to find. And this isn't about me suddenly sort of forcing people to write stuff. It's more just making sure that, given that at the moment we're running out of what is effectively a blog, which doesn't actually lend itself to structure because it's supposed to be a sort of rolling series of short posts, is effectively just to create some indexing and stuff, so that, for instance, if somebody wants to go and find something from 3 weeks ago, it will be easy to find. And in the course of doing that, we'll be able to find some places to pick up the structural points that we need to discuss and which you're alluding to. So I think hopefully, I'm going to be traveling for about the next week and a half, but when I get back, I should be able to put some bones onto that. And I think that will help, because it'll give us, once it's in place, it'll give us all something to lean against, because if nothing else, we can refer to URLs of the thing we're talking about. But also, I think it may help with the work that Raphael and Alan, who are now out here at the moment, are doing in the wider sort of community in terms of outreach about what we're doing, because they can, again, link into persistent URLs. So I think that'll, it's awful admin-y stuff. So in other words, it's lots of work to no immediate effect, but I think it will help a lot in terms of just putting some sort of firmness into place behind the rich discussions we're having.
Yeah, so Mark, on that point, because we've had some discussions about email on this as a community. So what has happened now, guys, is the journal is a future text journal. So that's all the publishing. It's linked to from Future Text Lab. Future Text Lab is now more about our transcripts and things like this, because of the reticence, which is fine, of putting content on there. I really don't want to force anyone to have to be listed anywhere. So if you go on the site now, there's a lot less there. So, we'll keep having these dialogues. I'll keep adding to the journal, but nobody should feel that they have to post anything, put up any bios. If people don't want to be associated with it, they can still be part of the community here. So let's not be too heavy.
I mean, the librarian part that I'm sort of alluding to also is that, in a sense, part of it will just be sort of getting URLs to already public things like, tweets. It's just a bit of sweeping up an organization. because I'm very conscious, lots of people are doing stuff and it's enough, for instance, it's enough work to make a demo, then doing a whole lot more bucket load of more work and sort of putting a reference to it absolutely everywhere. So to a certain extent, as long as, if there's something that we've been discussing, it's got a URL, one of the things I want to try and do is just gently sweep those up without forcing any structure or without editorializing it unduly. But just that if it turns up in general conversation, that there's a much stronger chance that people can come back and find it. And it's all on the thing, so it can be edited and re-edited. So it's not anything we need to I hope we make anyone feel awkward, but I just think it'll be easier to find stuff.
Fabian.
Yep, it's 2 quick remarks. I'm personally very interested in any librarian, but especially who has experience with 3D and especially VR, because honestly, I did ask quite a few librarians or anybody like curating research or even museum. Most of them are interested, but haven't touched it. They have the physical books, they have their own organization system, but nothing spatialized. So personally, I'm very interested in that. Everything like an extension of or a mapping of a GUI classification system to something else, multiple layouts, all this, I'm really into that. One quick remark though is, Bob, if you haven't tried VR for the last couple of years, do try. Like, it doesn't mean buying a headset, doesn't mean spending an afternoon in it, but I think just half an hour to put the headset and manipulate, in my opinion, it's really worth it, just in the sense that talking about it or having an opinion without a first-person experience, I think is infeasible or unrealistic. So I say this naively that I don't know what you have tried recently, but I think it's really worth even going like an arcade. Doesn't mean, again, spending much, but really to get a sense, I think it's really worth it.
Yeah, you see, Bob, when we looked at the mural in VR over the weekend, it was actually usable. We could actually walk along it, move back and forth. It was absolutely, I think you would have been very, very happy. And then, so,
I have seen it. I saw it.
No,
Brandel and I have been communicating, and he sent me that, and I even critiqued his presentation, which to me was so jiggly and awful.
No, but Bob, please. That's the point. That is why Fabian is suggesting you look at it in VR, because the way you're sitting now as a normal human, I can see your eyes are moving about, your head is moving about. If you were filming us right now and you put that on YouTube, it would be an awful presentation, because what you see and with the recorded VR is a human head moving about. And that is why you have to look at it through VR, because it is absolutely amazing. In VR, it is rock solid and nice and sharp. So I think you would greatly enjoy it. If you have the opportunity, please do. Also, I bought a copy of Edge magazine today, which is kind of a computer games magazine. It's very artistic and very cool. In there, they point out that the on-ramp for people buying VR headsets now is faster than the PC and faster than mobile phones. Last year, VR headsets, the Oculus outsold the Xbox system. So this is the time to experiment. So that was the evangelizing from the group. And now we've got that part.
Well, can I actually, interesting, as we're talking about poster, and just say, I just want to say a big thank you to Brandel for getting that up there, because that's, this is another thing. I mean, in a sense, this is like, I think in Matrix, like, this is our sort of starting construct, and we can start to think over it. I mean, and just an immediate reflection I had from with Fred, we sort of had a look at it together online in the Oculus. And the sort of the interesting part of it is the picture is actually rock solid. Current equipment limited, the old Fresnel lens sort of focus things mean, of course, that when you're standing at the distance when it's in focus, it's not particularly in focus at the far end, and that's a technical limitation. So I don't take that as a negative. but I'm reporting as something I hadn't expected. You know, and this to me is the interesting part of doing this, because what does that say? Does that mean that we might want to present it in a way that made it easier to sort of focus on more? Because of course it's something that, you know, if I see that poster up on the walls, you know, if I was standing in Bob's room at the moment looking at that wall, I can easily basically move my head, move my eye focus, and it's there. At the moment in the 3D space, or certainly using the Oculus is at the moment, I sort of find I need to move to where the focus is. And again, it's not just a fundamental critique, it's where we are. But I wonder if that offers us any ideas for making it more accessible whilst we have to live with those limitations. I don't know, for instance, if it was more wrapped around, bearing it's a long thing, and I'm very conscious I'm talking about something I can't do, but you know, I can't make it. But I'm just wondering how we can sort of maybe play some of the limitations over depth of field to you know, in a sense, to our advantage in the short term. Because, you know, if it becomes unnecessary later, then because it's soft, you know, because it's sort of code, we can say move it back to a flat plane at a point where we have more control. Does that sort of strike a chord with anyone?
I'm not quite sure I understand, you know, what exactly what the problem is. Can you walk along the mural? You have to, you're annoyed that you have to walk along the mural to get to the end of.
No, I'm not annoyed. I'm making it as a practical observation, so that when I look at when I look in the standing in the Oculus VR space, yeah, I can stand in front of the mural artwork when I'm at the correct distance that the sort of headset allows, because of the way it focuses, you know, the focal plane. Yeah. It's all crisp and clear. If I look right to the far end, I would be able to read it, or setting my reading glasses on at the normal distance. I can't at the moment in the VR, again, because it's to do with oh, sorry, Brandon, you will correct me now. Good. Please.
I think maybe Fabian had his hand up first, but
sorry,
both of you will address this point.
Yeah, Fabian will be able to address it as well, but what we're conflating here is the consequence of the accommodation, divergence accommodation conflict, and the level of anisotropy that's applied to the texture surface at this point. So I can tell you more about what that means, but we can probably make it more readable for you standing at that sort of oblique angle mark.
Yeah, but I just hasten to add, it's not a complaint. This is absolutely the point of whole dog feeding experience.
But it's a limitation that you're talking about, and what I understand is that you want to be able to see at a long, great detail at a long distance without walking over there.
Not necessarily. I'm just sort of, it's the thing that as the technology is at the moment, there are some limitations, difference. It's sort of like anything. I guess it's the difference like between reading an ebook and a paper book. There is a point where some things are just a bit different, especially to start with. But I want to stress that I don't want to think of them as negatives or me being sort of upset or angry they can't do it. I just think, okay, that was a surprise, is the way I put it. And some things may be a misunderstanding. And I mean, as Brendan's rightly pointed out, I mean, it's just as a presentation, but by the same token, I don't want to be in the position of saying I won't use it if it doesn't do a certain thing, because I don't think that way progress lies. It's a matter of getting in there, finding what's a failure of my perception and what's a limitation of the existing idea. Anyway, sorry.
Okay. On the list that I'm making, I'm putting it down as maybe a limitation at present. Would that be all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
you.
I think Fabian can address this point because it's a little more subtle than that, I would say.
But I would say actually be rough or be honest in terms of what frustrates the usage. Because I think for the example I showed last time with the remarkable is addressing limitation in the sense that reading text for a long time in VR it sucks right now. It's just not good, and you get a headache. But I think it's also not the point, and there are better ways. So I think based on the goal you have, let's say if you go in the space to have a discussion about the poster and the meeting and all this, so based on how we're going to interact with it, what's the goal for the session or the work or whatever we do with it, it's perfectly fine to say, well, until the text is readable, I won't use it. It doesn't mean the whole stack has to be thrown away, because, for example, there are things you can't do in real life, you can do in VR. Like I imagine that you can have glasses, virtual glasses in VR that adjust the focus based on what you're looking at. You can have like an HUD, like an augmented reality in VR based on what you look at. And there are a lot of things like this, or tracking what you look at to compile it, let's say, things that are just not conceivable otherwise that we can do. So I think it's very fine to be harsh. It doesn't, I think nobody will take it as an offense or way to say, okay, now we throw the whole technology out, and that's fine. Just one last point is, I think it's also really interesting to discuss about how we do it. There are user experience design recommendation. So for example, you mentioned, Mark, the curved screen. That's indeed something we see quite often. There are also how high or how low it is based on your neck position, because after, if you're like this for 10 minutes, honestly, it's not that great. It's better to be, let's say, a bit down. But it also depends on how many people use it, because if we make it curved and we're 5 people together, maybe it's awkward. We have to get stuff together, and it's social norms and all that. So to me, that's perfectly fine to criticize it, and it has to be regarding a specific usage or use case. Otherwise, it's generic complaints that don't actually help to find a solution against those limits.
Well, an interesting point, and again, those with more experience can tell me, because I'm still getting so used to it. It's a sort of the way that basically my eyes work a different way in this technology at the moment to the way I use it on it, and that, that's fine. So I'm thinking, well, if you made the text much bigger but further away, but I'm not sure because of the lens fit how this works.
Okay, so Mark, I can address that. I wear varifocals that have 3 layers, right?
Sure.
This is for checking my watch. This is for the screen. This is for the difference. So already I've had to use my eyes in a different way. If I look at you guys like that, you're very blurry right now. Yeah. So, yes, it's a limitation. Yes, we all want 20/20 vision in all circumstances. But what Brandel was talking about earlier, there's 2 different things going on. One of them is the focal bit, because of the Fresnel, really isn't that big. But it's also a matter of the texture of the 3D. So even if you turn and you move, it will, basically the little dots and the texture and all these other technical things come into it. But I have to disagree with everyone on one small point, and that is, I feel that when I use Immersed or one of the other ones, when I write on a normal screen that is quite small, but bigger than a normal screen, it's actually very pleasant. I wouldn't want to read a book that way, but I'm so surprised that if I decide it's just going to be there, when Adam put the future of text into what was it, Adam? We were in.
Mozilla Hubs, I think.
Hubs.
Yep. And it was just an image, but it was just at a certain distance, it was flawless for reading. And that's why I wrote the piece that I think I shared with everyone on what I want in VR. And one of them is I want to be able to, at my desk, define a reading box. Because in something like Immersed, we have the virtual screen. It's really fiddly to actually put it where you want. But once you can, you lock it. So if we could all have it, this is the main reading bit. So that's like a locked magic space with gravity or whatever. And then we can go in and out of things, but we have that safety thing. It's really quite wonderful.
Yeah. So generally, the sort of the history of modern VR is the history of appropriating technologies from other places where they had been improved and trying to apply them to virtual reality and getting the benefits, but also suffering the consequences. So one example of that is that, obviously the modern VR headset is a phone strapped to your face. The benefit of that is that people had, billions of dollars of investment in making phones and phone display and micro display technology. One of the downsides of it is that the thermal dissipation properties, like VR headsets get much hotter than phones typically do. And so they were much more thermally limited for a number of years until people could figure out how to do it without strapping great big fans to your damn face to be able to do it as well. The other aspect of this is that video game technology has been a massive driver for graphics for the last 20 years. And the concessions that are appropriate for being able to do textures within a video game have been the ones that obtain in the context of being able to display the textures. And so when you have that glancing angle thing, that's to do with the concept of mapping and reducing the resolution in a certain way that is typically acceptable for being able to discriminate that this is that texture, but not necessarily for understanding that this contains that information. There are ways around it, but because the typical context in which these things are deployed are pretty disinterested in the distinction between those things, it's taking time for people to come up with mechanisms to be able to kind of fight against that. And that's where technologies like the concept of signed distance fields, SDF text, as Adam has been using with Troika text, as Valve has talked about, and it's not unreasonable to assume that people will make use of it in the future. Yeah. Lovely. And those are advancements that can and do come along as technologists, the sort of more hard-nosed technologists than myself at least, come along and recognize that these are actually pending problems within it. You know, like I always say, that Moore's law isn't a force of nature, it's a force of economics and a recognition that these things are valuable and important to be throwing people and money at. And one of the jobs that we have right now is, yes, to critique, but also to work within the bounds of what is working right now in order to demonstrate that these questions are pertinent and important for the medium, in order to make sure that those technologists can then jump onto those and understand what they can do to improve it. You know, and you know, I don't know who watched the Super Bowl. I didn't, but what I did see was the Meta ad, the ad that Facebook had for the future of virtual reality yesterday, and it was simultaneously paper thin as a vision and incredibly bleak. I strongly recommend everybody watch it. Maybe right now, it's only 55 seconds long, and it's just, I would have cried if I wasn't swearing at the time.
Did you put a link in, maybe YouTube?
Sure, yeah.
Just wanted to show you something on your earlier point. By the way, in terms of Moore's law being about money, flying from London to Norway today, sitting in the sky at no cost, being online through satellites. So this issue that I showed earlier that had, you know, VR is now being taken up. It also has another article that's really fascinating. Probably can't see it, but it's on games that have absolutely no visuals whatsoever. They're only sound, and they're still on a PlayStation or something powerful like that, where they ask you to play it with your eyes closed, and everything you do, even fighting, it's based on hearing the space around you, because positional sound has become amazing. Really fascinating stuff. It's the
interesting. That's in this Edge magazine. I'll have to buy a copy. I was thinking about that. I went to a talk from
368.
Edge 368. Thank you.
Okay, let's all watch the Super Bowl ad, shall we? See who can find it the quickest.
Where is it? Are you going to show it on your desktop?
It's probably better if you watch it yourself because of the sound quality, but I'll give a link.
You got it? I found it.
I don't have it.
Hang on.
It's here.
I
put it in the chat there, Bob. That YouTube link is the Super Bowl ad.
All right, let's mute and watch.
Let's see, I have to turn my volume off.
That must be the saddest and dumbest piece of shit ever put together. How is it possible? How much money did that cost?
I imagine at least as much as the spot, which would put it in the mid 6-7 figures.
Wow. That was like,
So the reason why I bring this up and force everybody to watch it right now is that is the most prominent promotion from the most well-resourced company publicly pursuing virtual reality at the present time, and their attempt to get it to the widest possible audience. And that is why I am saying that the alarm for me, Frode, is not that we have 6 months or 12 months to work on this vision, but that we're working absolutely upstream, because the people who are technically the best positioned to be able to communicate this vision simply have none whatsoever. They're like, you can maybe relive some glory days because Ernest Cline wrote a book that was a thinly veiled sort of lament about opioid addiction. Ready Player One is about people being irrelevant in the modern workforce because there's nothing for them to do, rather than merely being 1980s fan service. So from that context, I just think that it's if I saw that before I was in virtual reality, it would push me away, and it certainly doesn't tell me anything about any opportunities or solutions that people have within virtual reality, and honestly makes my job harder. So I hope you like it.
Fabienne, what have you got to say on this?
Well, I mean, it's just, yeah. I mean, I hated meta before, but this is. So I'm excited by VR. I think as a medium, it is amazing. But I think overall, escapism is very dangerous, regardless of the medium, regardless if it's TV or hard drugs or whatever, or even just doom scrolling. I think escapism is really, really dangerous. And the worst part is it can be exploited. So when they put this as a kind of, that's the best we can come up with as a value proposition, honestly, it's extremely, yeah, I'm speechless. And what's also scary to me is Jarod Lanier, who worked in VR for a couple of decades, mentioned this kind of thing that like the Pavlov, Watson, Skinner box where you poke at the person. And of course, it's easier to poke at the person and put them in the right path for whatever it is, being business or politics, when they are lost and confused. So putting people in VR who don't have a place in society anymore, that doesn't sound like a good idea for democracy or an open world. So yeah, yeah, that's it.
I just wanted to say thanks for reducing the Super Bowl to a 1-minute clip for me about hell.
Well, I think that was, despite being horrible, the highlight. I don't quite understand people running around after a piece of leather and claiming victory because it lands in a certain spot. That's beyond my comprehension. But anyway, that's a different issue. So Fabienne, how was your journey looking into the reality of visual meta, considering that it's probably quite messy what we have out there already?
So I actually have something to show. It might not make sense, but I said I would do something. So I didn't want to look like a liar. I might be, yeah, you will be disappointed, but at least it exists. And like I said, this is how I learn stuff. So let me try to share my screen. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay.
Mars.
So yes, that's a bit unrelated, but it's something I did since. When I moved the nodes from the remarkable in a virtual world, based on their position, they can assign a tag or a category. And what it does, it loops back in my wiki. That's where I put all my nodes, basically. And then I can have this as a source of truth, basically, so that I can, again, position and have a result. Yeah.
So, okay, that's really important right there. So you use a wiki to take things from flat world into VR. Is that what you just said?
I mean, honestly, I use a wiki for everything pretty much. I use it as my, let's say, public file system, so that others can see whatever I'm working on or whatever I find interesting or some of the prototype. So I try to keep it as a source of truth, let's say, so that if I do something somewhere, changing the light on top of my head or reading about a book or whatnot, to put it there. And it means that's the active part, let's say, or the explicit part. But I want also, if I do something in VR, to be able to save it there and load it back from it, basically. So it just, it looks like this. Because I can edit it as a text normally. I can also have metadata with JSON, and then what I would use for VR is this JSON, but of the data itself. So that's to be able to edit it pretty much anywhere I want and save it like an API, basically. And to have a historical trace here, I have a data visualization of the last edits for every page I modify. But that's not for visual meta. What I did for visual meta, and that's why I bothered you also a bit, is I took the example. So no, I think, no, PDF. I guess this one. Yes, I started with this to be able to extract the metadata. And I hit a bit of a hiccup, so I used this example instead. And what I do basically is I parse the last page, and then I parse the beep text from it to get the actual metadata. And then from it, I generated completely arbitrarily a couple of information. So I took the level 1 headings, for example, and one information, just because I'm a little bit VR centric. I think there was a part on a, no, maybe this one. Yeah, something about AR VR. And then what I do is I pull them in hubs, because I think, again, great platform and social manual. And then it loads the different images, and then you can either manipulate them manually or have a layout to put them in position. And the information, I have 2 colors to differentiate types. That's content in white, and that's a header in gray. And that's it.
You're very good at setting up expectations, because I think this is amazing. So all your nonsense talk in the beginning, this is really a very important step. So if I can understand correctly, number 1, you use the wiki to take a PDF into your environment, and then you parse the last page. And at this stage, you extracted headings that can be visualized in different ways, right?
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. I just, from the aspect of what I'm looking at, I think this is a really, really important part of the journey. So Vint Cerf and I are presenting to NISO on Wednesday night, Thursday morning. It's 1:30 in the morning, Norway time. So it's nice to be able to say that obviously I'm not going to give any details, but I can, because I am presenting only visual meta, that's our entire slot, that I can say that we have started doing experiments with visual meta into VR, and we'll also look at putting it back out, because what you showed on one of the pages there was the data for how it's in that space, because that could quite literally just be written back in a new appendix, right?
Yes, yes, but I didn't have time. But
no.
But the goal is to be able to preserve, to bring some permanence. The easiest to me to say back to my wiki, but then yes, you can generate back the beep text, maybe replace the last page or add append to it.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal, and a box of whiskey or chocolates will be sent when I finally get your physical address. So now for the fun of next steps, and of course, we're working on many different things, murals, documents, and so on. Adam and Brendel, if you were to work with this thing, let's call it a thing that Fabien has made, how would you want to access it to take it from his world into your world? Is that a reasonable question to ask the three of you to discuss? I think it would be really worthwhile to know how that might happen.
One thing that I will probably have to do is investigate hubs. I haven't used it to implement any sort of additional sort of features. Is it A-frame driven, Fabien?
Yes, it's in hubs, and hub uses A-frame, so yes.
Right. Okay, cool.
A quick, sorry to interrupt, Brendel, just want to say, anytime Brendel, and I believe Adam too, show something with text, they are legit in the sense that they are manipulating text while I'm cheating. I'm generating an images or image that have text in it, but they are not manipulable. For example, Adam was showing selection. I can't do this with my solution. So there are like a bunch of limitations. It's to show, let's say, manipulating the one piece of information, but just to say that this is not something I even know how to do, let's say.
But that is exactly what is so important. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm not talking about Brendel starting using A-frame and hubs. I'm talking about Brendel taking a PDF that has normal visual meta plus yours, plus the spatial stuff, going into his own world where he may have actual text or it's just rendered as an image. The point of visual meta is that you can write this stuff at the end. And if you have certain affordances, Fabien, Brendel has others, Adam has others, that should be okay. Because at this point, we're not trying to be Meta or Microsoft and own the whole world. We're trying to make it possible to move the knowledge and environment. So that was really nice to hear you guys talking like that.
Yeah, but so the other thing that I would do is, I think it is worthwhile. The other thing that I realized as I was very gently maligning A-frame at work the other day, that I don't if you know Fernando Serrano, he works with us at Apple, and he was one of the major contributors to A-frame while he was at Mozilla. And I was just saying that I found some of the places that it helps somebody to be a little bit misaligned with where I am with what I tend to need to be solving. So he was pretty gracious about it. But I have access to Fernando to be able to talk about what might need to be done within the context of that A-frame stuff. So I might make use of that in order to be able to sort of play more fluidly with that, as well as to leverage the co-presence framework that's already there. The other thing that I would do is make use of what Adam put in order to, on his augmentation of my mural presentation of Bob's work. So everybody working there, where he was parsing the PDF, because that means we now have the native ability. Oh, we lost Rhoda. We have the ability to open a PDF and pull down all of the text information in it in order to be able to get to see that stuff and then work out what to do after that, because I haven't opened a PDF before in a page, and now Adam's found a library for that, and to be able to kind of process aspects of it. So we can do, regular expression searches to find the things that look like visual meta and drop our interpretation of them in properly.
That's wonderful. I see a hand mark, but sorry, just one more thing. Bob, your mural, which previously is kind of the antithesis of what I'm doing, because it's a thing, I think now is a very powerful force multiplier for this, because some things should be all jumbleable, some things shouldn't necessarily be. And I could imagine having, let's say, the next issue of the Future of Text book, have your mural at the back. So if you have it on paper, it'll be folded and it'll be very awkward. But if you then choose to view it in VR, put it up on the wall size. And if you want to, have all the articles underneath it so they can be read too. In other words, having only the interactivity of yourself walking up to it like you'd physically do is phenomenal. And what Adam and Brendel has worked on is phenomenal. So to have that as a combination and to be the thing that worries me technically about this VR, I'm not going to use the M word, is we need different tools for different tasks.
Yeah.
So how do we go between them, right? Literally different rooms is one of the things we've talked about. So yeah, this was very exciting. And Bob, thank you for being a part and helping highlight that.
I will be very happy to cooperate with anybody who can help do that. And I have even more interesting murals than one I've got on the wall. with some that we could fly through a little bit as a demo, and for example.
Excellent.
Zoom.
Yes. Mark. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm muted. The reason that the reason I set my hand up was something I think of before, and then I'll come back to reflection on what you just said. Is first thing was when I looked at Fabienne's stuff, I think, oh, here we are. It's Ted's cut and paste example. But actually, it's more. I mean, it's not as that may seem a trite observation, but actually, I've seen a number of tools over and over again trying to basically make easy something that back in the typewriter or handwritten age, people literally wrote it down, cut up strips of paper, move stuff around. And the fact that one may be doing it on a screen, it doesn't lessen any, it's the affordance of being able to, because, Fabian said, okay, the text isn't selectable, but actually that's less important. You have a token which in here, you've associated with something. So even if you're only working, say, at the level of a heading or something, I still find that tremendously powerful because it allows us to expand our brain space. Some people are great at imagining big mind palaces, others, their focus works a different way. And it's not a matter of being judgmental about that. I mean, the point is what this to me offers many people is a bigger exploration space. And that brings me around to reflection what you just said about different tools and things, because I don't get so excited about necessarily walking around somewhere. One of the interesting things to me is more that actually bringing it to me and the observation also that was in, I can't remember, it was the Richard Scoble thing, and so basically saying, well, actually, probably the high attention work is going to be happening sitting down. And I thought I thought there's a lot of truth in that, and whether it was a throwaway observation or a really deeply founded one, I care not. I think that's quite true. So what that says to me is that, nice as it is, and to also have the affordance of moving within a virtual space, it may be that actually sometimes what you really want to be doing is you moving the space the space moving rather than you, which is something it's actually not very easy for most of us to do. It always ringing a bell and getting someone to bring something. It's, whereas we can do that now and say, here I am, I don't want this stuff now, I want that stuff. And so you can sort of have this focus shift. So that I think is also very pertinent in our exploration at the moment.
Alan, so you just joined. Fabian has his hand up. Just want to say we talked about a lot of interesting things. Please look at the video in the future. But Fabian has taken our journal into VR space. He has there found the headings through visual meta and allowed them to be manipulable as separate objects. And we're talking about how that's very different from what Adam and Brandel do in terms of how they deal with text. So the exciting thing is, of course, how knowledge pieces can be moved around in different systems. And also Bob Horn's mural really highlights that, to me, I shouldn't be too much of a snob. Something that's big in itself is a huge improvement over what we have available on a computer. So how we can move in different spaces. So hi, Alan. Fabian, please.
Yeah, so I wanted to, I don't want to, how can I put this, diminish, let's say, the image aspect. Number one, the image is a trick in the sense that it's one of the primitive, let's say, of Mozilla Hub. So in order for other people to join the room and see it moving, as far as I know, first you can't put text, and if you put text, it's not networked, so nobody else is going to see it, and in VR it's challenging. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I'm saying that first I have no idea how to do it. And to come back to what Mark just said, it is already powerful in itself that you have an item and that you can move it around and put categories, new affordance group and all that. That's and we discussed briefly last time about zoomable interface. To me, it's going to be also that you have an image at first, and then as you go to actually manipulate it, then you switch to, let's say, text proper. So there are an image is a trick, let's say, and it sounds a bit vulgar nearly in a group about the future of text, but it does provide, I think, some of the core, not necessarily the core affordance, but to have an affordance to it already, and then that can bring interesting discussion to actually go deeper.
I see hands up, but I have to ask regarding that point, Adam. You put text on top of the Bob Horn mural. Could that be something that a user could put on there manually, like a post-it, within the way you're using it now?
Yep, absolutely, and quite trivial to implement as well. Or yeah, it is. So the main question is where that information is stored in the long term, I think. Because I mostly agree with you, Frode, in terms of capabilities. I just feel a bit reluctant to put things back into the back of PDFs, because it's a very destructive process going back and forth and doing manipulating old PDFs with new software and so on. Lots of things happen, and it's not as accessible. So that's the main thing. But putting things on the screen in a fixed location and persisting that location is quite trivial, and that's the next step for us in a way, I think. Putting extra commentary and bringing in other documents and other text, and maybe Bob's comments on the poster, on the mural, I mean, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, so sorry, Peter and Bob, but just a little bit with Adam here. So PDF, I think the benefits, of course, the issues, I do agree with you, but the benefits is almost all academic knowledge is PDF. So that's, if we're going to address that crowd, we have to deal with it somehow. You know, Mark and I this weekend, we went through looking for other formats. It just isn't used. And the other thing is, when you say it's destructive, I actually feel it isn't, because this is a completely new page. So when you make that, you know, you save it as a new thing. So if someone wants to delete all the visual meta, that should be trivial. But that is me being, of course, rosy tinted glasses. I do accept that any change with a document can bring with it issues. Absolutely. And I'm not saying that it all has to be visual meta. Absolutely not. I think visual meta is the lowest common denominator. Hopefully we will mature rapidly past it. But a key issue now is, let's say I go into the room and I spend some time with Bob's mural. And then for some reason, because we have been working on it, I have a copy of our journal in there, in that room. And then I take out strands and I want to pin something. Now we have two different data sources. You know, where does that get stored and who owns it? That was the first piece that I wrote for our journal, because it's kind of scary that we have to think about that, but also good, because it means we're not living in, you know, like Microsoft Word and Photoshop spaces. It's a different dynamic. So from the technical perspective, and I think we should let Peter and Bob speak, but if you guys can think about that, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on that. Yeah, Peter.
Okay, on a nostalgia inspired by that Super Bowl ad, I put a link in the sidebar to the FuturePort 82 project, and that was using Unreal Engine, I think, if I remember properly, to create a full, highly detailed 3D model of Epcot Center as it appeared on opening day. They have two versions of that. One, they have a full desktop VR version that theoretically should be viewable with an Oculus headset as a fully immersive environment. And they also use QuickTime VR to create a whole series of jumpable panoramas to simulate walking through. That was the second link to FuturePort that I put in the sidebar. So with that one, you get like a little Epcot logo at each alternate camera viewpoint, and you can jump between them. And I actually see a huge use case for recreating lost architecture and environments in VR that I think is pretty strong. Not the silly diner thing, but actual places that once existed that got horribly mangled with new color schemes, destroying their original aesthetic. And of course, reconstructions of archaeological sites. I know there were some people modeling some of the major cathedrals like Notre Dame in VR, and maybe we could get someone from one of those projects to come in and talk to the group. Moving on to an unrelated subject, has anyone taken a look at ScienceSpace's VR? I'm putting a link to that in the sidebar. ScienceSpace is an interesting company. They're sort of billed as being a serious businessy alternative Second Life. They have somewhat superior graphics, but inferior avatars. So the avies look more like mannequins. They're not as well developed as Second Life avatars. However, the world itself has a much better graphics engine, supports vegetation that looks far more realistic, and even has mirrors that can actually reflect the scene that you're in. They also have amazing support for third-party VR hardware, including an open VR system that will supposedly work with the Oculus headset. I know that it works with my 3D mouse. So I have full 6 degrees of freedom control of moving my viewpoint around within ScienceSpace. It's a much smaller company, UK-based, and I think that they would be much more open to working with a group like ours than Meta would, since they're trying to position themselves again as a serious alternative where the VR environment would be used for doing things other than gaming with apps from an app store. So that might be something worth considering. If you're interested, I might be able to try to reach out inside of ScienceSpace and see if someone from there would be interested in talking with us here. As far as getting things in and out, I was doing some searching of developer sites for Oculus, and I found one discussion that seemed to be expressing considerable difficulty in getting data in and out. I basically said they were looking for good external cut and paste support for a couple of years, and that the Oculus people just didn't seem to be interested in that kind of a use case. So I'm afraid that Meta might be viewing their VR as a roach motel, where they'll want to get as much content in as possible and then make sure that that content can never migrate to competing virtual worlds. With that consideration in place, the suggestions in those discussions was that anything that needed data transfer should be done on a desktop projection into the virtual world, so that you'd be using your PC screen to interact with data on a virtual screen rendered inside of the metaverse, but the actual data transfer would be happening on the projection of your original flat desktop screen, so that you'd be using the full internet-enabled desktop affordances of a regular web app for the data transfer. Another possibility would be to project QR codes into the virtual space, and assuming that you were able to mirror the virtual space on your desktop, you could then use a phone or other device to zap in the QR code that was being displayed from inside of the virtual world, and then use that talking over the network to try to pull the data in. But the data would have to be living out somewhere on the wider internet and not be inside of the metaverse, because apparently the metaverse at the moment is a roach motel for data. Whether that's been alleviated in the latest builds or not, I don't know. The developer post was a few months old, so it might have been fixed in the newest development kit, or it may not have been, and I don't know. I think the ScienceSpace angle might be worth investigating, since it works with the headsets you guys are already using. And it's, again, a small company that has a serious business orientation to it. So working with their developer people might be considerably more efficacious than trying to interact with Meta, which doesn't really seem to know what it's doing at the moment. So those are my current thoughts.
Thank you, Peter.
I'll definitely check out the 82. I mean, for various reasons. Sorry, real quick. I'm reluctant to use anything but the web, because I feel like the web it's very difficult for people to have an implementation of the web that they don't keep open. And so, you know, whatever ill intentions any organization may have, if they're actually making a claim to something being on the web, then like what we lose in performance potentially, but not always, we gain back in terms of the interoperability. Like if they implement the clipboard API, which they really must, then we have access to the clipboard, and there's a limited amount that can ruin it for us. So I'll definitely check out what they're doing with Sciencebase, but the reason why I use web is not just because I know JavaScript better than other languages, but also because the concept of the web is much more amenable to the intrinsic openness that I want and need in order to be able to continue these experiments.
Yeah, thank you. That was, yeah. Bob?
Well, I'm following up to something which Mark said 15 minutes ago. And it is that what I've found in actually working with teams, often in Zoom recently, but also in person, and also with a variety of other things on the internet, is that we need to structure the information that we have so that the mural that you see on the wall is structured in a timeline fashion with layers. And that enables people to organize their thoughts. This is not the only way to organize thoughts visually. There are 15 to 30 different structures that help groups that I have helped. I will give you one more right now because it's connected with nuclear waste disposal, and that is argumentation mapping, a different kind of structure that organizes huge numbers of pros and cons so that people can study them and come to decisions. And unless you're doing that with 100 or 200 different pieces of evidence, pieces of inference, and 8 or 10 sub-organizations, you can't think about this stuff. So we're really trying to improve thinking with teams of people in this situation. And this is where we are right now. I see that virtual reality could help us with this kind of thinking, and also just enabling the implementation of these kind of structures on our 2D screens would also be of great help. So I offer to help anybody who wants to work on that. But I think that if you're really interested in improving thought of all of humanity and science, and we need to work on those, work off those structures for now. The structures are not perfect, they're not complete. There are many gaps and problems, but they're better than the best thing we have for teams working on very messy, wicked, big, complex problems.
Yeah,
I like social messes. I thought that was a great speech, but yes.
Thank you very much. Lots to think about and to act on. Mark, you mute.
Yep. Right. I'll probably get as quickly as possible. I was thinking about VM, and I put a note in the side thing. It's not what we intended with VM, but it's worth bearing in mind that if in some context it's really, really problematic to have it in the document, there's nothing to stop us having it separately. The point, and a useful thing to consider in the VM in the round is that, as long as it's got a link back to the document, it's not what we intended, it's not what we wanted, but nonetheless, it's still there. Because where to me it's become increasingly important is I spent a lot of time in the last month or so trying to find anything useful in PDFs, apart from the fact they exist and we have to live with them. It's the case that, for instance, it is apparent that LaTeX cannot produce a tagged PDF. In other words, one that has structural data. The very structure of the sort that Brandel's talking about needing. And if we sort of say that using something like a sort of a web environment inside a virtual environment to handle our text, that's a major showstopper. It doesn't invalidate what we're doing with VM, but it also means that there's actually added salience in having the VM, because it basically can provide structure that PDF can't and probably never will, because I don't see who's going to spend the money on it. So I can see basically PDF is a thorny legacy problem we're going to have for a long while. But I mean, I made a comment that I think went down rather badly at the Tinderbox meetup yesterday, and which was that, you know, I don't want to write in RTF anymore. I'm wasting my time. If I'm not writing in something that's going into structured text, I'm wasting my time, because I'm investing in dead technology. It's not that I don't like typography, which is where people tend to get hung up about things like PDF, but solving 1980s problem about reproducible print is not what we need for now. The next thing that sort of leads neatly onto, we talk about taking things in and out. And one of the things that rattling around in my brain is a warning to myself to not get too skeuomorphic in approach. It's quite natural for us to sort of say, right, to move this in and out of here, I'm going to do it, and we pick a metaphor that we know. And I'm sort of stealing myself and hopefully others to sort of say, you know, because if we're talking about all these new affordances we don't have, let's not cut ourselves off from perhaps some really innovative new things simply because it doesn't fit our perception of how we transition between environments. And the last thing is just a very quick reference back to what Bob quite rightly said about having this temporal knowledge of things. And I just make the note that that's an interesting problem in itself, because what time are we talking about? Is it the time we're referring to? Is it the time of creation of the asset itself? These are all valid. I think one thing we can say is if you ask 5 people, you'll probably get 10 answers as to what the time is. So there's work to be done there as well, but I won't try and dive down that rabbit hole now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I see you have your hand up, Alan. You've hardly said anything. I don't think you've said anything but typed, but I'll give the mic to you, but just, yeah, go ahead, because I have a specific thing afterwards to go back. Please hop in.
All right, I'll try and be quick. And I'm sort of out of the loop catching back up because I've been in workspace, but I'm gonna tell a quick story, and for the purpose of is anybody working on what I'm about to suggest or thoughts around it? So I'm sitting at my desk right now. I've got my computer monitor and a secondary monitor. I've got this other computer here. And what I'd like is, like, I'm not going to be leaving this situation for a while, right? My work is always going to, for the foreseeable future, is going to be on a laptop and external screen and whatnot. But if I had glasses, it would be nice to be able to work on these screens, and then either with a shortcut, keyboard shortcut or something, move some text over into a virtual place over here, maybe sticky notes, you know, maybe some highlights from a PDF that is on the screen, but I'm moving it over into an area to the right. And then, of course, if I have a meeting for work, I can just sort of, you know, dispatch them and replace it with what's better fitting for that context. And that kind of interplay between the desktops, the situations that we have now, the flat screens, plus an AR layer that is a baby step into VR, plus even, like, you know, I've got this Stream Deck, which is a nice little version of IoT where you have just a series of buttons that you can program if you want to perform functions in your computer without having to use the keyboard. Is there anybody working on the problem from that angle? And is that
it's
worthwhile or short-sighted?
It's a key thing of what we've been talking about. And I'm just going to put my comments in there for this. The issue is that if you use something like Immersed or whatever it might be, and you have your actual screen in VR, it's actually pretty good quality right now. I think it's actually shockingly good. And yes, you can have many virtual monitors, you can just millions of them. That's not a problem, and it's really cool. But to take a thing on that monitor out and into VR space is not a solved problem unless somebody's going to shout at me that it is, which would be great. Right. Yeah. So that is one of the things we're talking about. So I'm being a bit pushy today because of the presentation to NISO this week. There's been a few calls on HTML visual meta, and then everything gets really vague for completely understandable reasons. But so on a PDF with visual meta, you take it into VR. Logically, you could add another visual meta with VR information, take it out. With HTML, you cannot do that unless it's hosted in a wiki. You can't do it on a normally published page because you can't write to it, right?
Well, I don't think that's
okay, fine. I see a lot of funny faces.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is that the format question is largely independent. One thing that actually HTML has that PDF doesn't is that it has a self-editable kind of runtime. So that if you open a web page and it has JavaScript in it, then you would have the ability to make that JavaScript save itself into the web, save changes to that web page in and of itself. So it's a self-contained program that runs within the browser that you would be able to use to change the contents of that thing. Most people don't do it that way because most of the time web pages are served over the internet as these static, comparatively immutable things, much like PDF. But it is a capability that could be leveraged. It's just, as I was sort of saying about the other things, outside of the realm of imagination of what people think HTML is and is for at this point, because there's normally a relatively well-appointed server mechanism that people are making use of. The other reason for that is that it's typically the case that once you make a change to a file, you want to be able to make sure that other people have changes to that file. And so, what I'm proposing doesn't have that ability, but nor would PDF per se. So I would say that there are options, there are approaches, and I would also say like my hostility isn't to pursuing options with PDF. Like you said, there is an inordinate quantity of PDF and preference for PDF within places like Elsevier and ACM and things like that. And to that end, it's something that we're stuck with. And I also believe politics is the art of the possible, making sure that you can actually come up with a reasonable transition from the status quo and push it into the future is essential. So don't mistake my lack of enthusiasm for PDF as an unwillingness to participate within the ecosystem. But yeah, I think we have a number of options and opportunities that can work through PDF, but we can also work past PDF with our sort of vision for how to leverage a concept like visual meta, which still retains its utility beyond the point where we have to work within the primary constraints of PDF.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, it's nice to be smacked down like that. That was very useful. I do have the question, though. I would like to invite Tim Berners-Lee into our community, but that means HTML has to be part of it, and it can't be very loose. So in terms of trying to narrow it down a little bit, can we do one of the following? In the header of an HTML document, dump visual meta as is. And can we also, because Adam is very much about keep the metadata around the data, which is totally fine. Can we maybe do it in a CSS style that the data in the page knows what metadata is being used around it? Or I'm just trying to irritate you guys into saying something solid in return. If you disagree with me completely, that would be absolutely fine. I'm just typing a note for the next, so don't stop thinking.
Sorry, Fabian, do you want to go first? I mean, I've got a comment on what Fred said, but you far away.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just first, I apologize. I have some connection issues. I don't know why. So sometimes I still see everything, but I can't hear voices and I can't read lips like this. So it's a bit tricky. unfortunately. So I'll briefly, I have 2 points. First, well, the first one is the web is everything. I work for the web and on the web, and I live via the web, but it's not, let's say, a religious belief. It works, and everything we do, even though most of it are through apps on our phones, there's still the web in the back end, and even the view itself is the web. So to me, that's obviously yes, the web, and that's what I know. So it's pretty pragmatic on that end. To go back on Alan's point about moving things around. So this, I hope, is a bit like what I tried to show last time. Is each device, being VR, AR, or others, have their different properties and different advantages. And if we go, let's say, through a process, if we go through a Bob's poster, not everything has to be done, let's say, in front of it or different mediums. So each medium has its properties and advantages. What unfortunately I don't have as a visual is this, which is I stuck a little IoT device under my chair, and then based on the rotation of the chair, it would do an action for a device. For example, I would have the Remarkable on the left of my screen, and then the desktop there, or my phone on the right. So that's some ways, but that's, let's say, just the interface to do this. In the end, you still have to have some way to communicate between the device and using the web, for example. So I think in terms of interfaces, it's it's pretty straightforward, actually, as long as you have, let's say, a source of truth, let's say the angle for the different position that you have in front of you, and you can how do you say, manipulate that conveniently enough. I don't use it anymore. It was a fun proof of concept, but yeah, it's definitely feasible to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I've gone actually the other way with that kind of thing in the past. I don't know if I've demonstrated the thing that I do with this projector, but when I have it attached to this phone in a 3D printed harness I put together, it can show kind of like a flashlight things on a wall where they should be, and then show different things as you turn it to different places. So that's fun. But one of the things that I got a friend to help me with is to write a REST interface to a microcontroller to be able to drive via the web a stepper motor to be able to do those angles as well. So then you can actually hit a website to change an angle. So in the same way that you have web interfacing data returned about the orientation of something, which you also get from phones very, very easily, by the way. You can also drive those things via the web, and I think that in general that's been and continues to be my preference for how to glue things together. Is even if you're making use of capabilities that aren't natively possible on the web, what I tend to do is write a minimal interface to get it into the web, and then interoperate between all of those things. So yeah, I agree, and I think that there's just a wealth of things that you can prototype and explore, making use of it as an interoperability layer to do that thing.
That's fantastic. I'm going to narrow things down a little bit. Adam, putting you on the spot. How do you want visual meta in HTML? Let's say all we're talking about is title, author name, and date. Let's just start with the simplest. Where do you want it?
I would put it in multiple places. I would put a whole section with the metadata in one place. You can get it all in one go, and then I would decorate the document, decorate the different HTML tags by as much information as I can, an author on a paragraph or a heading, for example. So whenever you copy that paragraph, if you're lucky and the clients don't strip all the HTML, you will get the author name or author ID or whatever you attach to it together with that clipboard thing. So you don't need a special clipboard for every page, but rather if the document has that data, it will continue to travel with the data. I think that is the approach I would take. Of course, there are many details to it, all RDFs and microformats and so on, where to actually put that data, and that is a discussion. You could put it in several places, but I think the problem with the microformats of earlier is that it really interweaves the presentation layer with the data layer, and that what's supposed to be the beauty of it, but it's also the problem with it. I would rather have a separate projection as a view and then attach the data in the background hidden.
So if you love me, Adam, can you mock that up? Even if it's almost nothing, because then we have something people can agree or disagree with.
But I think we should have a discussion about it. We have lots of web people here that have been. I've been deep into this, very deep into this, and I have thousands of hours into what I'm describing now. But most people have been burnt by that kind of metadata, and it has never taken off. We have seen so many versions of it, so we have to learn from the past mistakes. That's why I'm a bit harsher on Visual Meta than the rest of the people here, because there has been a lot of metadata initiatives like that, and all of them has kind of fizzled out basically. And HTML has lots of capabilities for metadata and header tags and lots of so it's quite complicated, and it's mostly a social problem, getting people to agree on things. So it's not as technically hard, but socially hard.
Oh, I completely agree with you. But the thing is, the reason we chose BibTeX has many issues. It's just academic default. That's what that world is. And it is super simple. You can just have, this is this, right? So that's why I think, but also the kind of people we have available to us in this dialogue, if we do something and we'd have the preamble that you just said, we could literally take it from the transcript and put it in. They could say, oh, this part's great, this part is awful, but no one has to use it. But the thing is, saying, you know, Edge magazine basically kind of invented Visual Meta for me, that article with the crisis guy. If things, this, and the way that Vint Cerf keeps talking about Visual Meta, because he's pushing it more than me, it's really quite wonderful. He just says, if things know what they are and can communicate it, you can have a really interactive environment. So we have the right kind of people to approach this. And Tim Berners-Lee, I'm not going to pretend he is somebody who knows me, probably never heard of me. I have had one very long discussion with him, and I was shocked by his genius. It's much more than the web. I really was blown away by that guy. But we work with the same people, you know, he knows Vint Cerf. So he is one of the big brains and names who could come in and say, yeah, metadata, here's one way of doing it, and throw a little bit of weight behind it. And then there is the other issue, which is really, really important. And this is what Alan brought up. And this is what I've written some pieces on in our journal, of course. How are we going to do it? You take your laptop in, you're in VR, you have your laptop, there's a thing, let's call it a PDF for now. How can you take it out and put it on the wall? What's the mechanism, guys?
There's something called the drag and drop API. Like in a technical sense, the way that you do that is by interpreting gestures and making sure that they're preserved within the context of the browser system.
No, but don't
the drag and drop API will do it.
No, I'm not convinced that's even the goal, though.
No, but hang on a second. So to really clarify, because it's such an important point, I'm talking about, I'm now in, let's say, Immersed. It's a third-party company. They allow me to have my actual laptop screen shared in VR space, just to clarify where we're talking about, right? And then I'm reading in Reader a PDF with Visual Meta. And I now want to have the glossary over here. I want to have the table of contents here spread out horizontally, like Fabian was doing earlier. What is the manner which the data that is there, because the VR environment just thinks it's a flat projection. It has no knowledge of what's in there. How can I do that? What's the technical way to have that moved across?
Are we sure that's
it's definitely one of the goals, Alan, because the metadata that is in there, let's say we want to take the glossary with, you know, hundreds of different definitions and put it in a constellation, right? You see, the thing is, Fabian, Adam, and Brandel, who live in these things, they are so beyond people like me that I don't even know how to put something in those spaces, right? And I represent
Okay, so
a normal user. So I'm doing a thing in this rectangle and I want it everywhere.
okay, so let me present a different scenario just for the sake of understanding. Let's say I'm reading a PDF here, right? But I have the Apple glasses on. And as I'm reading the PDF, I see glossary floating in space over here. And as I'm going through points and highlighting or whatnot, it's activating or highlighting over here. So I can see that the two are connected. If that was the case, if I'm extracting meaning in that way, do I actually need to take the PDF and put it into space?
Alan,
Does that make sense?
That's an important point.
Your glass, as far as I understood you now, because I was also typing back to Fabienne, what is on your device and what is in space have absolutely no knowledge of each other.
Is that true?
That is a trivial, in the scheme of things, that's a trivial hurdle to overcome in the big picture. Like it's inevitable that they will connect, that there will be a universal.
So Wednesday
space.
night, evening time for you guys, middle of the night for me. I'm doing as a pre-made presentation to NISO, the National Institute of Standards Organization in America Land. After that's going to be Q&A. I want to be able to tell them that one of the things we're working on is you take a newly done academic document, you're reading it in your laptop, you're remarkable, whatever it might be, you don your headset, and then you think this document is too dense, there's too much stuff. Then you magically pull it out. You have your headings, you have your glossary, you have your references as lines, all this stuff, not necessarily every single word. You pull that out and you have it in a space, you can do amazing things with it. And one of them may be a mural, like Bob Horn's example. You pull that up, but right now I cannot grasp anything here, as far as I know. So I really want to know from the technical guys in the room, am I wrong? Can we drag it? And if not, what do we suggest as a mechanism to take all that stuff that's here and give it to the room, so to speak?
Well, I think if I may, I think you're overemphasizing the physical aspects of it, i.e. the transition between.
Mark,
let me finish, please.
No.
Overemphasizing the transitional change, because the physical thing in front of you is very real, you can touch it. The other is, at the moment, almost an imagined thing. But I think Alan made the point quite correctly that it doesn't necessarily, it's all ones and zeros under the hood. So there isn't quite necessarily the hard definition you're seeing. So in other words, we're sort of making a bigger thing of that hurdle. There is an issue over what gesture, what literal action we take to do that. But the transition between the two,
okay,
I'm
but
struggling to see.
Mark, why don't we just let the guys who build this address the point, whether it's important or not?
All right, I'll shut up. I obviously got nothing to say.
Yeah, please let the guys talk.
Do you want me to say stuff?
Mr. Technical,
okay.
Yes.
Sure. So I mean, but by no means the only one. But so right now, absolutely at this instant, there's nothing you can do unless you build your own reader that has the ability to interpret the user inputs that are necessary to do this. So if we were to build a web, but that said, if we were to make some web page or other application where we have the full access to hand gestures and whatever else is available, then it would be a matter of just interpreting the user gestures like a pluck or an eye dwell or a head dwell, or any of those things are relevant, and then identifying what are the relevant things. So I do believe that it's sort of technically trivial once the need has been identified. But yeah, right now there's nothing that PDF or an Acrobat reader of any kind would be able to permit you to do that does that. But yeah, I'm not concerned by that, and why I'm sort of more interested in what the sort of intended use and function is, in order to be able to determine what would be the appropriate plumbing to be able to facilitate that user gesture and action. I hope that answers the question reasonably.
Just writing a reply here in text. It absolutely doesn't, and it does all at once. You know, we do have an application called Reader that I own, meaning the community owns it. It is open for us to experiment on. It's a Mac application. And if you guys have a mechanism whereby you want the user to be able to do that, I'll try to make that happen. But of course, absolutely, at some point, you won't have your Mac screen in this environment. It'll be a fully native VR component. And then this problem is gone. I completely understand that. But before we get to that point, you know, the thing is, having spent some time in, and you know, there's been many shocking VR moments for me. The mural was one of them, because it's completely uninteractive as an object. But the movement of walking around like it is on the wall was hugely useful, was such a surprise. So just being able to even if it is having a normal PDF, forget visual meta, just a normal PDF saying, I'm watching it on here, I want to take it in here. Should we maybe have some kind of a browser plugin or something that says, upload it to this person's wiki page? Or what is the actual way? Because until we can do this, we're dealing with only hypothetical data, right? I see Fabian has a hand up as well.
I'll just answer on the mural part of it, is that you can structure each one of the elements on a mural by grouping them in Illustrator. And so there could be some kind of overlay in Illustrator or some other visual program, but I prefer Illustrator, that enable you to grab any chunk of any of the either 200 more textual chunks, which are separate and can be grabbed, or any of the visual chunks, or even of the grouped textual chunks could be grabbed. I'll stop there.
So I'll make 2 points. I'll go back then on the mural and the software used to edit it. In the end, it's the same principle as what I did for the Remarkable or to extract the PDF with a visual meta. The challenge is it's always custom. It's always for every single file format, every single presentation. We don't know what's important. We don't know how to do it. If we can understand that format and, for example, find a group of the Illustrator format that makes it, let's say, either grabbable or whatnot, then we can. But for now, it's every time custom. Now to step back on the question about the affordance of having a virtual screen in VR and grabbing something from it. Honestly, I think it's interesting. I think it's feasible. It's feasible today, but I don't think anybody is doing it. I think what at most you have is something, a video basically. And from that video, at most, there was, I forgot the name, but there was a researcher from the Media Lab who was, his basically core idea was that you take photos, just like you do in real life with your phone. You want to remember a moment, you would take your phone, snap a photo, even if it's from an invoice, a friend, whatever, and then that makes a memory and affordance you can come back to. And he was suggesting to do the same in VR, so that you in VR, you see your screen, you take a photo, and then you can manipulate that photo of it. That's why I was asking in the chat, what do you want to preserve? Is a photo good enough? Then that's what you can probably do today. I believe in most cases it's probably not, but it's a step. And otherwise, I think from this screen you stream, you could probably have the pointer. Let's say your controller becomes like a virtual mouse, let's say. And from it, if you see something like a browser tab that has a URL, then you can pull the content from that URL back in VR and then have a much better representation. And if it doesn't, then you're a bit stuck because maybe the person doesn't want to share what's on their desktop beyond public accessible URLs. But it can be conceptualized, can be implemented. As far as I can tell, nobody has done it.
It's phenomenally interesting, and it's not so nice to hear that approach, Fabian, because Again, I'm shocked by the usefulness of the damn mural. I say that with love, Bob. So if we could build a mechanism whereby anybody could take any PDF, let's forget anything other than the actual thing, and just put on some glasses and view it in VR, it will be amazing. That same thing, right?
I want to jump in and actually dispute the non-interactivity of the mural. One of the things that's really important about paper, and one of the things that I think Mark Weiser was really, if you're not familiar with Mark Weiser's discussion of ubiquitous computing, pads, tabs, and what was the other one? I can't remember. Then it's absolutely essential for understanding what virtual reality has the ability to offer. That's why, as I've mentioned in the past, I'm not super interested in VR or HMD VR as much as I am in immersive computing, which encompasses all of these other concepts. But the point of the mural, as I'm sure Bob will attest, is that you can change your relationship to it. And that itself is interactivity that we don't typically afford ourselves when we're looking at things on a digital display, because they have a specific relationship and orientation that they work for. Unfortunately, in-plane switching on LCDs has obviated this somewhat, but there's even a viewing angle that they completely break down at when you're looking at a lower quality screen. So there's an incredibly, and it's taken it out of the realm of the imaginable to realize that we can change our orientation in the way that somebody who's doing drawing will actually move a document around in order to do that drawing. And when we're reading something, I don't know if people have done reasonable studies of it, but I would be fascinated. When you read paper, I suspect that the viewing distance of it is proportionate to the level of difficulty that you're having with it. Certainly, I furrow my brows and pull a book in as I'm struggling with the concept. And we don't have that ability when we're working with things in typical pixel space, but we start to unlock just a smidge of that once we get those things into virtual reality. And that's what I think the proposition, but why it's also essential to remember that what's happening with the mural is interactivity per se, but it's my acting and interacting with it at space for reasons. So that's all. Sorry.
I think there's a huge agreement with that. And it was really lovely to hear that passionate speech, both for your interactivity as a body with the document and also for further interactivity. Absolutely, completely. I know I speak for everybody here. I think the only thing that I'm being very pushy on is before you can have interactivity with a thing, you must have the thing. And that's why I'm saying just having it there in the beginning as a very, very, very first step is so absolutely amazing.
Well, we're if anybody will help, we can do what you ask for volume 3 of Future of the Text. That is, have an appendix, which would be a demo of not just one mural, but I have several murals that were done together and which can be interlinked, and we can pull out some of the chunks of text that that I mentioned and show them, and we can fly through, zoom through them. It seems all possible from what I've been seeing. So we can.
No, I'm definitely keen to pursue that. I'd love to chat more about what we might do with the data that you sort of collated and have already sort of ready to be interlinked in that way. So that's definitely something I'm interested in. Yeah,
we'll set it up.
Mark, you've been very patient for a very long time.
Well, I mean, I related to what I was going to say earlier in terms of a comment I put in the sidebar anyway. It's just that I think one thing to not overlook is it's more, if you want to do stuff with W3C, which is effectively Tim Berners-Lee, don't just think of HTML. Remember semantic web, and I know it came to nothing really, but Solid is now around, which I think is sort of basically semantic web 2.0. So the most obvious question that will arise is, how does visual meta fit with that? And as I sit here, I don't know, because I've just, the thought has only arisen since you mentioned it. But I think you need to know the answer to that before you go into the room. I know, because I know his work is protect is perhaps an unfair way of putting it, but he's consciously made an effort to make sure that the sort of legacy of the W3C, which sort of basically keeps the web on the straight and narrow, so that the various protocols and things interact. So I don't think they're any way antithetical to one another, but just something to be aware of, because otherwise you get blindsided by it. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm not going to fly off any emails to him at any point soon, but I think it's nice to have a persona in our mind as in who we want to present this to at some point. And of course, you know, his understanding is much wider. Peter.
Okay, I think that we should consider having our own custom protocol. I mentioned that in the sidebar. And then borrow Jeff Raskin's idea for humane names for a way to get things moved around. When I'm moving between radically different systems, I don't want to have to remember full IP addresses. I don't want to be bound to the domain name service even. But if I could have a short little phrase that I could remember that would represent a given document, like giggly purple grouse. The idea is that 3 human memorable words put together into a grammatically correct phrase are extremely easy to memorize. You could put that in your Oculus VR application and then remember that exact same name and type it into a web browser. You don't even need a cut and paste clipboard mechanism. Your brain can be the clipboard if the identifier is simple enough and memorable enough. And then assuming that both applications have access to the internet, you'd be able to then go to some canonical resolving service to convert giggly purple grouse into a real web address that would contain the actual file. For the file format, I think we should really just make a conscious effort to advance something as an alternative to PDF. Like I suggested in the sidebar, let's call it augmented document format instead of portable document format, and then make that format have several alternate representations. One representation can be highly optimized for a machine, and the other representation should be more verbose and be designed so that an ordinary human could generate it and understand it by looking at it. So it's not going to be as compact. So instead of having, you know, a path, M some number, S some number, where those single letters represent a command, you could instead have path, start at point, and then give the actual coordinates, move to point, give the actual coordinates. It would be a verbose format. You wouldn't be authoring by hand necessarily. Your tool could automatically convert SVG into that verbose format, but it would be something that would be intelligible to the person, easy to parse, and we can produce the grammars to provide that bidirectional translation between a compact Rosetta representation of the data, a verbose human readable representation of the data. If you wanted to write it in a human readable form, you could. The real advantage, this is the EPA markup idea I was advancing in our last meeting, is that if it doesn't look like any of the markup notations and actually just looks like plain freeform text, it will pass through any systems that are filtering, looking for Markdown or looking for JSON unmolested, because none of those things will be able to parse it, because again, it's just freeform text. So those systems that aren't designed to actually parse it will ignore it. That allows us to send the data through. You can email giggly purple grouse to someone. You can send a instant text message, giggly purple grouse, and that simple little set of 3 words out of all the permutations of 3 words from the dictionary gives you a huge namespace for potential documents that isn't going to overlap. Worst case, you could qualify that with a second one as your personal identifier. So it could be, you know, sharp scholar, giggly purple grouse, and that would tell us that we're actually in Fro's namespace, so that we could have, you know, 3D aces, giggly purple grouse means something different. And he wouldn't have to enter the ace, you wouldn't have to enter the scholar identifier because your local system would know what your prefix is. So that would be the idea of using your local nicknames as opposed to a globally unique one. Globally unique one, you could add an extra identifier to represent you, gives us a vast namespace to play with. And the actual files could be something that would be really, really easy to produce. And the advantage there is, instead of making someone who wants to support our format go out and find tools to parse PDF and generate PDF, they could work with our layer, and then we could provide one single canonical transformation into a PDF space. Now, what functionality would we want for our format? The main thing that PDF has going for it is that it's used by typesetting systems in order to produce high fidelity line breaks. So if we bring in the Neufplatt line breaking algorithm and a couple of the core ideas of LaTeX, we can jettison its horrible macro language. There's a huge LaTeX ecosystem that consists of macros layered on top of the tech language. The tech language had a crappy model for how to do function calls and macros because it was written pre the development of all the technology that lets us do sane rational macros. So forget all that. The core of the functionality provided by the underlying tech engine is the ability to assign weights and demerits to different typographical constellations. So it can try a whole bunch and then do an overall weight minimization function to pick which one is the best looking. That
Okay,
algorithm we can move forward.
Peter, you're going, it's interesting, but going quite far down a rabbit hole. I have a question though.
Sure.
It seems to me that this means there's got to be something on a server, right?
No, you
Yes.
could do a completely distributed approach with this.
But it would
Well,
still be.
what it entails is a protocol. It means that you need to be responsible for more of the agreements between clients and systems and potentially oblige them to supply additional stuff. I'm kind of with Bob. I'm not super interested in taking up that part of it, in that it obliges one to be responsible for more than the most interesting piece. And I believe that when as I've sort of mentioned in the past, once I'm in a weird position in this group because I appear to be a technologist. What I am in technologist circles is a conceptual designer working on the idea of things. And what in practice happens is that when I speak tech well enough, that once I understand and identify a problem, then they can say, oh, okay, it's this. And they can squirrel away and come up with incredibly deft solutions for that specific thing. What I think is incumbent on a group of people like this is to enunciate the problems in such a way as to make sure that they understand the characteristics, the operational characteristics that are required for that solution. And as such, I think that while that work is also valuable, it has to be backed up and premised by a clear enunciation of essentially the user function, what it is that a person does, the way that we sort of conceive of those documents in the first place. And as such, I'm less concerned with the sort of the technical plumbing, even on a user individual level, but certainly at a global level. And in general, what I've found is piggybacking through existing formats like HTML, even like PDF, especially SVG. I made a really great pinball game using SVG once, where I used the RGB channels to represent the restitution, coefficient of friction, and density of all of those elements. It was really fun to say to the artist, like, look, we don't need to write an editor. We have the editor, it's Adobe Illustrator, just make that thing magenta and it's going to bounce right. So that's the kind of stuff that I think we should be looking for. And at such time as people realize, well, actually, we don't need to call bouncy magenta anymore. We can make our own tool. That happens later on down the piece. Once that sort of requirement or value is clearly enough sort of stated through the use of the tools, that people realize that skeuomorphism can fall away, and we can take effectively the conceptual space to the lower energy level where we're not wrapping it in those other things. But at this point, in terms of the evolution of these concepts, I think we're better served by piggybacking inside and through things like PDF, like HTML, like SVG. I hope that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And this is why I think we need to make smart knowledge objects, so that the object itself contains enough information to be useful. The web and the internet, both great, but you shouldn't have to have connections for everything all the time. So I think we're on similar pages. But Peter, you have this habit of saying stuff that I don't understand and it sounds really stupid. And then a few months later, it's like, and then I think it's my idea. And then I remember it was your idea. It happened with the hashing of the PDF document. So this is one of those where I just don't get it. Because I'm wary of the web effect, but I look forward to when I get it in the future. So I hope you understand that was a real compliment, even though.
Yeah, I'll try to do some sort of a little demo, and that'll make it gel better.
Okay.
I think in principle it is a valuable component to it, particularly as if it turns out that there are aspects of this that we can't sort of have access to through web, or that we want to be able to have a layer that has different sort of latency profiles. For example, I think that there's one of the least stupid things about blockchain is the concept of IPFS. but I haven't seen it proven out yet. And I think that that's definitely a very useful way to conceive of the approach for it at such time as people have more of an awareness of the value proposition this kind of thing brings. But we have other work to do in front of that in order to be able to bring it to everybody. Sorry, Bob.
I'd like to show you, share my screen with one other thing today, if that's possible.
Yeah, but not too much because we're running out of time and we still have a very practical issue, but please go ahead before that.
Yeah, please.
Let's see, has that happened? Can you see us? Can you see me?
We do, yes.
All right. That's at the University of Illinois. This is what you can do in 2D right now. In fact, this was done 6 years ago at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And the students whom you can see in the foreground could put up Post-its. I could shift between 15 or 20 different murals that were that could pop up on the screen just with a pointer, and move it around. I could zoom in like in our and zoom out and focus. So all that's possible in 2D now, and so we can, it's possible to include all that in a demo if we want to do that. Thank you for the time.
That was really nice to see because that's very much how I felt when I saw your mural in VR this week. Right, so in kind of getting close to closing, I need to know very specifically from you guys. I have a PDF, mural, text, whatever, it doesn't matter, on my computer. I'm putting on my Oculus. I want to view it like what Adam and Brandel have been working on. What is the easiest solution I can have as a normal Mac user consumer that we could potentially produce as, let's say, a free tool or whatever? How can it be done? So we can call someone on the phone and say, what, you're not using the two items together? Do click, 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 click. What's the easiest we can do? Adam?
A website.
A website with a drag and drop interface. You drop your PDF file on it. I loaded the PDF file directly into my the small tags I show some of you. So that's, you could have a drag and drop website. So you drag your PDF from your desktop to that site and you get it in VR. If we want to persist some data from it, we could potentially add a PDF page with, but I don't suggest that way, but I would rather have a small sidecar file that is your kind of 3D position, so things, but that is quite doable and less than a day's work or half a day's work.
So, so does that mean that me as a developer, if I wanted to, I could add in Reader, my PDF reader, the keyboard shortcut V, and it loads a post to a web page. I put on my Oculus. If I am in that space that I've already told my browser what is, it's there?
Yeah, you'd need some more plumbing. So, so for example, I shared that page on Glitch, very sneaky paste. And what it presented was the view of everybody's cameras and heads and hands to each other. I can link that again. That does require a server, but that sort of is apportioned to the action. But what it does is give you a real-time conduit between all of the different clients that are interfacing with that. And what you do with that is up to you. And that's essentially what all of these things, VR Chat and Second Life, are doing. But having the ability to run that means that if you have one client that is self-identified as a desktop computer, and you connect to it with another client that is self-identified as your headset, then you can interpret those commands differently. And so that if you say, I want to pull this thing from the desktop client and signal to the VR client that I want to get this thing up, then you can press V and you can make that happen.
Okay, so even more concrete then, can we on our future text website add a page and a thing where one of us can just drag a PDF, put on our Oculus, and if we're on that page in VR, we'll see it there.
Can I show you?
You're gonna have to pay for it. Yeah, yeah. Fabian's got it. He built it.
Yeah, Fabian, please. But Brenda, what do you mean have to pay for it?
You need to have a server that has the capability of being able to respond to those things. You can't be just serving dumb files because you need people to be able to interpret those things properly.
Right. Okay. Let's see if Fabian's showing. Thanks, Brandel.
This is what this is what I showed you a bit earlier. That's a bit how it's in the backend. Let's say the list of images, but the PDF that are used to generate are those that I guess you know pretty much by now. And what I can do is I can drag and drop it, and then I have my PDF in there. I can skip to the next page, and then I can also take a screenshot, let's say, of that page, and I can move it around. That's straight up from Mozilla Hubs, which is already open source. What's interesting also is if I give you the link to that page now on the chat, you can join it. And here I have hmd.link. So it's live. You would see me moving around. I'll just put it now. It's a cheap server because, as Brendel said, you still need to pay for server time, so it's not free. So it might lag if you join me there. Also, if you join me there, do please put your microphone on mute, otherwise it's going to be total cacophony. But otherwise, the PDF can be drag and drop just like I did. And you can then pin them in space so that they are there when you come back, let's say tomorrow or whenever you want. And that's viewable in the headset. That's why I put the other window there, is because if you ask a friend or a colleague, hey, open that PDF, unfortunately, what I often end up doing is doing it for them. And once it's a social space, it doesn't mean it has to be social. But if you want to help someone or do a certain way, that definitely helps.
Well, that was wonderful. So then I have an additional question. Would it be useful to have an infrastructure whereby on our FTL websites, each one of the technical people has a space where they can choose to have code, so that, for instance, Adam does a thing with a mural or with a PDF, with text, whatever it might be, that we always know that it's on there. And here's the kicker, we can choose to drag our own thing in there so that we can compare what Fabian, Adam, and Brandel's doing, and so can anybody visiting, because we're doing different things with these documents.
What do you mean by comparing? Is it opening different tabs, basically, with different projects and look at them at the same time, or is it something else?
What I mean is, from what I remember over the weekend, Brendel started with the mural, and it would be amazing if we could have that interaction, but I could drag any PDF in there, and it would be centered in that spot. And then you, Adam, added the numbers coming out. So then I go to the Adam page or Adam tab or whatever on our sites and drag in that or something else, because that would be an incredibly easily accessible way for all of us to look at everyone's work. All you need to do is send a tweet or whatever that you've updated it. It's all on the same thing, and we do it with our own data. Or is that a big infrastructure that would actually impede your way of doing prototyping?
So I can answer this, and I was interesting thinking about Bob's description of the structured abstracts that the NIH, right, that has mandated structured abstracts. That's essentially a file format. You know, in the same way that we have protocols that we've established for what constitutes a JPEG, they've invented a file format, but it's a file format that's powered by people and bureaucracy. I like to say, that software is just bureaucracy sped up, and my wife retorted recently that that bureaucracy is just software slowed down, so to that end, whatever processes, whatever formalisms you put in place are you can do that right now. To my mind, in terms of the work that I do, that would be burdensome to work within the confines of, unless those confines were relevant for the domain of my exploration. So hubs is a really great place to be able to do stuff because of the stuff that it carries along. I haven't used it before because, like I said, it sort of provides opinions about things that I don't believe I need opinions on right now. But depending on how important co-presence is, it may be, you know, worthwhile to be able to kind of pull in. So we can do that. It would carry a financial cost, not a big one, but like dollars a month in order to run a server that is capable of doing that interop.
We have a
would
server.
need to be,
We have a server
Right.
that's on. We can use whatever we want. It's a pretty powerful server. And Fabian
it
says,
depends
no.
Right.
Okay, what's the no, guys?
No, but it has, unfortunately, it's pretty specific. So it's not you. I wish hubs could be installed on any server, but you can do on AWS, DigitalOcean only. It's a bit annoying.
Yeah, so if you have to have the whole keys to the castle. I have a website, neocities.org, but it specifically stipulates that it only does hosting of static files. You don't have the ability to program the backend to be able to respond in certain ways.
But
So that's why
the server we have is a complete machine. It's not like a WordPress thing. Everything on there, we can do whatever we want.
Okay, well, in that case, it may be possible to make use of it. But I'm not sure what other sort of requirements and constraints apply to what people do. But yeah, you'd need the ability to be able to run some kind of socket server, so that it is able to do the real-time media connections to all of the different devices.
Fabian, you raised your hand.
Yeah, hubs in itself is not super problematic to set up, and I've done it a couple of times. So honestly, it takes me an hour. It's, as Brendel said, a couple of dollars a month. It's not expensive. What's tricky, and I think it goes back a little bit of last time the discussion about collapsing, is, at least for me, yes, anytime I need to describe or share a video or the link here, I hesitated to give it to you all, not because it's hidden or private or secret, is because some of you are going to try it now and some of you might try it tomorrow. And I might break everything in the next 5 minutes or in the next hour or never, I don't know, but I don't want to have to care, honestly. Like, I think that's why at least I'm excited by prototyping, is because I can move fast and break things, as some know, but because I don't have a lot, like a whole social network behind me. So honestly, it's a daily struggle. It's not specific to this. Well, I want to have both an environment where I can do whatever the heck I want and break everything, but I also want to capture it or help for others to tinker with it. For now, unfortunately, don't have an answer, but yes, you know, if it's not done right, it's going to hinder the pace at which it's possible to explore from my habits, let's say.
Yeah, very similar for me, and that's why I even post screenshots at times, just to show a snapshot of a moment in time when the prototype looks like that. It may not even look like that in 10 minutes because I do other things and move on, and keeping preserved copies for people to view on the way, and also mostly having instructions how to behave in that space, because there is no handrails anywhere. Everything can break. That will take half a day's work, maybe even, or many hours at least, to explain what you can do in it. So it's not out of secrecy or being mean to show screenshots only, or very small. So I usually send code to other coders because they know they know the feeling, and they know that everything is half of a mirage and scaffolding that doesn't hold up to inspection, and the code looks like it does because you have pasted together from 10 different earlier projects and so on. So it's a bit different. It's a bit hard to. Things may look more finished than they are, and I want to share things much later, weeks later in the process. That's my.
Sorry for the sad answer.
Well, and this is really, really important, because we don't want to slow down innovation, but we don't want to lose what we learn along the way. So we've now been fighting in the best possible way around the blog and journal and all of that. And you guys don't seem to be having a problem with me scraping Twitter to build journal articles. So I think, Mark and I, our job is to record and help you test and write about things. Your job is to build. So, if you do the screenshot, there's nothing wrong with it. I obviously would like some working code as well to be able to put in the journal. But also, I really think we need to, not necessarily right now, but we need a manner whereby something we have built, people can use their own data on. I think it'll
so that's what I did with the Gutenberg, thing. It doesn't require a server there, but it does require sort of instructions in terms of the drag and drop, and we can definitely make things like that. It's just how that scales into what level of friction you expect people to be able to put up with in order to make it happen. So you can obviate a backend if you are willing to say download the file and drag it onto the screen. So yeah, definitely there's a whole continuum of options in terms of how much you're willing to put a user through versus how much you're willing to kind of pave the way for them. But the more that you pave, the more opinionated it becomes, the more sort of fixed it becomes in terms of the steps that you need to follow and what it's sort of functionally there to do for people. And for a well-resolved concept, I have no objection to putting something out for that. But it sort of crystallizes it in that particular form for that particular sort of question. And so, without a doubt, it would be relevant to do that with Symposium. But until we have that, then it's not a place where we would continue to iterate, if that makes sense.
That's fine. So what I will say on Wednesday night, Thursday morning is when it comes to VR, we are messing about all over the place in our workshop. But we do feel we have a need to get two pieces together. One is a phenomenally deep augmentation where you can do things we can't even dream about now in order to learn, create, communicate. But also it needs to be as easy to get into, not to use, to get into as putting on your regular glasses, right? So if you're in Flatland on a screen and going in through some mechanism, we will make it so that you literally click a button and it's all there. Lots more discussion, lots more experimentation, because if VR becomes its own room, its own space, its own environment, I mean, this is one of the reasons I hate the metaverse, partly because it's a commercially owned name, but also because it isn't separate. I mean, Brandel, you have, punched a hole in my skull to highlight the fact that we are living in AR and VR now. It's just that we tend to access it through flatland screens. So think of it, accurate words like that, it makes sense. And that means I can talk about our intentions. I can talk about our ideas for data to be encapsulated, that we don't use the network only when we have to, and all that good stuff. And then use the beautiful example of the mural, starting with something that in itself is not interactive at all, but it's in an interactive environment. And then we can add layers to the mural, just like you were saying, Bob. And then we can take documents where the system understands the semantic structure of the document, work with that in the same space, and etc. I feel much better after today's talk in terms of understanding the realities of our world.
I'm glad.
Okay. Any final words from you guys? You should all wish me luck because it's going to be stressful, but do you have any other words than that?
Oh, yes. A whole lot of luck on that, because I think it's really important to get visual meta into the national medical system, and particularly the medical library, and that's also a possible entry point for research funding for this kind of project. So much of, really appreciate, eager to hear what happens.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be attending, of course, a lot of other sessions. So this is NISO, the National Institute of Standards Organization. I've also been in touch with the people who are in charge of the NIH, the National Institute of Health in America, with this metadata approach. So to be able to say that we are really properly looking at the future is, it's kind of ironic because half of us here are old white men. Some of us are young, but we do need a wider community. It's really important for the perspectives on the future of text. But I'm glad to say that at the moment, we certainly don't behave like who we look like. At least I like to think so. Anyway, have a good week. I look forward to Friday.
Have a good week, guys.
Bye, guys.
All right.
Good week. Take care.
Bye.
Everybody, thanks.
Bye-bye.